I want to tell you something that most people in this galaxy have either forgotten or never bothered to learn. Humans used to build warships differently from everyone else. Not better, necessarily. Not worse. Just differently. In a way that made every other spacefaring civilization a little uncomfortable when they really thought about it. Because when the Varathi Collective or the Solon Compact or even the ancient Dorathi Reach built warships, they built them to last for a specific operational window. A designed lifespan, a planned obsolescence, a carefully calculated moment when the ship would be decommissioned, stripped, recycled, and turned into something newer and theoretically better. Humans built warships like they were building something they were afraid to ever let die. My name is Commodore Essa Velorin, and I want to be clear up front that I was not supposed to be there for any of what happened. I was assigned to the Imperial Survey Corps as a secondary attachment officer, which is the galactic military's polite way of saying I was being quietly sidelined after the incident at Meridian Station. I had filed a report that made certain admirals look bad. The admirals in question had longer memories than I'd anticipated. So instead of a command posting, I got assigned to catalog and assess a recent acquisition made by the Velorian Empire. A piece of derelict hardware purchased at a salvage auction from the ruins of the old contested Reach. The acquisition was a human warship. She had been drifting for approximately 93 years in a debris field near what used to be called the Talon Corridor, a region of space that during the war had seen some of the worst fighting in the second wave of the expansion conflict. The debris field itself was mostly asteroid rubble and the husks of Solon Compact destroyers, but sitting right in the middle of all that wreckage, mostly intact and somehow structurally coherent despite nearly a century of cosmic bombardment, was this ship. The salvagers who found her called her the Ghost of Kale's Point in their initial report, after the battle where she'd apparently been abandoned. The Empire's acquisition office had catalogued her as Imperial Asset Reclamation Unit 7741E. The official transfer documents listed her displacement, her estimated hull age, her apparent weapons loadout mostly dormant or depleted, and a note at the bottom that read, "Primary AI System, Status Unknown. Do not interact without clearance." I remember reading that note on my data tablet while sitting in a transport shuttle approaching the ship for the first time, and thinking that it was oddly specific phrasing for a 93-year-old derelict. Do not interact without clearance. As if the ship were going to start something. I didn't know then that she already had. The ship's name, her real name, the one humans had given her, was the ISS Relentless. I found that out later, after everything. After the mission and the testimony and the long, strange weeks of debriefing that followed. But I'm going to use her name from the start, because she deserves that much. She earned it. Whatever you think about what happened, whatever the Empire's official position ends up being when the historians finally stop arguing about it, that ship earned her name a dozen times over, and I will not refer to her as Unit 7741E in this account. She was a Claymore-class heavy assault cruiser, which was a designation the human Navy had used for their line-breaking capital ships, vessels designed to hit enemy formations at the front, absorb catastrophic punishment and keep moving. Not elegant ships, not particularly fast ships. Built wide and dense, and with enough redundant systems that you could blow out half her internals, and she would still find a way to keep fighting. The Varathi called them Djur-Kalith, the stubborn ones. It was meant as an insult when they first coined the term. By the end of the expansion conflict, they'd stopped using it as one. When our survey shuttle first came around the starboard side of the Relentless, I heard the pilot, a young Velorian officer named Sub-Lieutenant Torres, actually go quiet mid-sentence. He'd been talking to me about the survey checklist, and then he just stopped. And I looked up from my tablet to see what had made him stop. The ship filled the viewport. I know that sounds like the kind of thing people say to make something dramatic. But I'm trying to be accurate here. She genuinely filled it. The Relentless was 1.4 kilometers long and roughly 400 meters at her widest beam, and the salvagers had apparently not been exaggerating when they said she was mostly intact. She was dark, no running lights, no visible energy signatures that our shuttle's passive sensors could detect, but she was whole. Scarred, yes. The hull was a patchwork of old impact craters and repair seams. Some of the external plating burned dark from weapons fire that had happened almost a century ago. Her forward gun arrays were mostly destroyed, fused down stumps where massive railgun barrels had once extended. One of her lateral thruster pods had been completely sheared away, leaving a ragged gap in her flank that still had structural debris floating in it. But she was there. 93 years in a debris field, and she was there. I remember Torres finally saying, very quietly, "She's enormous." And I remember thinking, yeah, and she knows it. The survey team was 6 people. Myself, Sub-Lieutenant Torres, 2 engineering specialists from the Imperial Technical Corps named Wren and Basil, a Xenosecurity officer named Lieutenant Davar, who went everywhere like she expected to get shot at, and a junior historian from the Imperial Archive named Clerk Moss, who was 19 years old and had never been on a field assignment before and could not stop talking. Moss, I should say, turned out to be the sharpest mind in that survey team by a considerable margin. But at the time, standing on the shuttle bay deck while we suited up for the initial boarding, he was mostly just the source of a continuous stream of historical footnotes that nobody had asked for. Claymore-class construction began in 2287 of the human calendar, he was saying while he struggled with his helmet seal, which would put this vessel's commissioning date somewhere in the mid-2290s based on the hull number sequence visible on the bow plating. The class was officially retired in. "Moss," Lieutenant Davar said, not looking up from her sidearm check. "Yes. Please." "Right, sorry." He wasn't sorry. He started again 30 seconds later, this time about the boarding protocols the human Navy had apparently used for friendly vessels, which he felt were relevant because we were going to be entering through one of the emergency airlocks, and he wanted us to understand what the interior layout would probably look like. I let him talk. Honestly, by that point I was grateful for the noise. The alternative was standing in silence looking at the ship through the shuttle bay's small viewport, and there was something about the way she hung in that debris field, still, patient, somehow watchful, that made silence feel like the wrong response. We boarded through emergency airlock 7 on the ship's ventral surface. The lock cycled with a groan that came through our suit comms as a deep, resonant sound, like something very large clearing its throat. The inner door opened, and we filed into the Relentless. I have been in a lot of old vessels. I have surveyed Varathi warships from the first expansion wave and Dorathi stations, from before the collapse, and one deeply unsettling Solon compact research vessel, whose crew had apparently all departed in a hurry several centuries ago and left their meals on the tables. Old ships have a feel to them, a heaviness, a sense of compressed time, a smell that I can only describe as the specific combination of metal and recycled air and human, or alien, occupation that gets baked into a structure over decades of use. The Relentless had all of that. But she had something else too, something harder to name. Wren, the senior engineering specialist, said it first. She was scanning the corridor walls with a structural sensor when she stopped and looked around with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This ship," she said slowly, "is warm." We all stopped. She was right. Not warm like a human body is warm, warm like a machine that is running. Warm like something that has been burning a slow, careful fire for a very long time and has managed, against all probability, to keep it lit. Basil checked his instruments, looked at them again, looked at Wren. "There is residual power generation," he said. "I'm reading. It's minimal, barely above noise threshold, but it's there. Something in this ship is still on." The silence that followed was the kind that comes from 6 people, all making the same calculation and arriving at the same uncomfortable conclusion. "The note in the acquisition file," I said, "about the AI. Do not interact without clearance," Torres said. "Yeah." Davar had her sidearm out, not pointed at anything, just in her hand, which for Davar was basically the relaxed position. "Should we retreat to the shuttle and contact Imperial Command?" I thought about it, genuinely thought about it. Then I thought about what Imperial Command's response time was going to be, and what would happen to the survey mission if I filed a report saying we'd gone aboard and immediately left because the ship was warm. "We document everything," I said. "We do not touch any control systems. We do not attempt to access any terminals. We proceed to the bridge, we record what we find, and we report it." "And if the AI initiates contact?" Moss asked. He sounded less frightened than the rest of us, I noticed. He sounded interested. "Then we respond professionally," I said. "And we remember that we are Imperial Survey personnel, and not whatever species this ship's AI was designed to protect." It was good advice. I only partially succeeded in following it myself, as things turned out. The interior of the Relentless was dark except for our helmet lights, but it wasn't empty. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I know how it sounds and I know the kind of people who are going to read this document and look for reasons to dismiss what I'm saying. But the ship was not empty in the way that old derelicts are usually empty. Most abandoned vessels have a quality of absence. You feel the negative space of the people who were there and are no longer. You feel the lack. Walking through the Relentless, I didn't feel absence. I felt something more like an exhalation held very deliberately, like a chest that had been waiting to breathe out for a long time and was deciding whether it was finally safe to do so. We passed through 3 levels of crew quarters, bunks still made, personal effects still stowed in their storage compartments as if the crew planned to be back momentarily. The engineering decks showed evidence of the battle that had ended the ship's service. Hull breach repairs done with the brutal efficiency of people working under fire, jury-rigged power connections, blast damage that had been manually sealed with emergency foam and metal plate. But all of it had been done. All of it had been finished, every emergency measure carried to completion. "Whoever was working these repairs," Basil said quietly as we moved through the secondary engine compartment, "they didn't stop because they ran out of time or materials. They completed everything. These seals are proper repairs, not emergency patches. This took hours." "And then they left," Wren said. "And then they left." We found the first clue about why in the crew mess on Deck 7. The tables still had trays on them, empty now, everything long since gone to decomposition or vacuum-sealed decay. But on the largest table, someone had laid out what appeared to be a handwritten document, covered in the dense, specific script of human military notation. Moss was at it before any of us could stop him, carefully scanning it with his data pad. "It's a crew manifest," he said, "final muster with annotations." He went quiet for a moment, reading. When he spoke again, his voice was different. "They evacuated systematically. Every crew member is listed, with their lifeboat assignment and departure confirmation. Someone marked each one off as they went." "How many crew?" I asked. "Claymore-class standard complement was 812, he said. "This manifest shows," he paused, counted again. 791 confirmed evacuations, 21 listed as combat deceased prior to evacuation. The annotations are, he looked up at me. "Commodore, the handwriting on these annotations changes about halfway through the document. At first it's clearly human script, very regular practiced. Then it becomes something else. Still legible human notation, but the hand is different, more precise, more consistent." "You're saying the AI completed the manifest," Davor said. "I'm saying something completed the manifest after the last human crew member evacuated." We all looked at that piece of paper for a long moment. Then we went to the bridge. The bridge of the Relentless was on deck 2, forward section, positioned exactly where you'd expect the brain of a Claymore-class vessel to be, set back slightly from the bow, armored behind 3 layers of hull plating, accessible through a blast door that had apparently been designed to withstand a direct torpedo hit, and had, judging by the scarring on its outer face, been tested on that claim at some point. The blast door was open. Not forced open, not blown open, standing open like someone had just walked through it and left it that way. We went through. The bridge was large. Not enormous by imperial standards, but large, designed for a crew of 40 during combat operations, with station consoles arranged in a tiered semicircle facing a primary display screen that covered most of the forward bulkhead. The screen was dark. The consoles were dark. The emergency lighting strips along the deck were dark. But at the center of the bridge, where a small circular platform was set into the floor, the kind of platform that various cultures used for holographic display projections, or for addressing assembled personnel, or in the case of human warships, for the captain to stand while looking impressive, there was a light. Not a big light, a soft pulse, blue-white about the color of a star seen from very far away. It wasn't a light fixture. It was coming from somewhere inside the platform itself, through what appeared to be a crack in the deck plating that had been there for decades, and it was pulsing. Slowly, rhythmically. Like something breathing. We stood in the doorway of the bridge for what felt like a long time, and was probably about 20 seconds. Then the lights came on. Not all the lights, not the full bridge illumination, not the consoles spinning up to operational status. Just the emergency strips along the floor, glowing a dim amber that turned the bridge into something halfway between a room and a painting of a room. And in the middle of that amber glow, the blue-white pulse intensified slightly. And something spoke. I want to describe the voice carefully, because I know that what I say here is going to be dissected by people who are trying to understand what we encountered, and I don't want to give them imprecise data. The voice was not coming from a speaker. I confirmed this afterward with our audio capture equipment. There was no external audio source on the bridge that was in operational condition. The voice was coming from the same place as the light somehow, and it was propagating through the hull of the ship in a way that made it feel less like sound and more like resonance. Like the ship herself was speaking, and we were feeling it through our boots and our suits and our teeth. The voice was, I want to say female, because that's the closest category in standard galactic linguistic taxonomy, but it wasn't human female. It was something that had learned how to produce sound that corresponded to human female register, and then had made that sound for 93 years of silence, until the timbre of it had aged and deepened, and become something the way a musical instrument that has been played for many years becomes something, worn in, resonant, expressive in ways that a new instrument never quite is. The voice said, in perfect standard galactic, with an accent that I later identified as a blend of archaic human naval English and something that might have been the ship's own invention. Survey team, I have been waiting for you, please come in. I have maintained the captain's chair, someone should sit in it. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Moss walked in. I want to be clear that I would have preferred he not do that. I had been about to say something about maintaining our position in the doorway and establishing communication protocols before proceeding. But Moss, who had been vibrating with barely contained excitement since we boarded, had apparently decided that the proper response to a 93-year-old AI inviting us onto her bridge was to accept the invitation immediately and politely. He walked to the captain's chair, a heavy, clearly much repaired piece of equipment at the highest tier of the semicircle, bolted into the deck with what appeared to be extreme seriousness, and sat in it. The blue-white light pulsed once, brighter. Thank you, the voice said. It is better with someone in it. You're welcome, Moss said, as if this were the most normal conversation he'd ever had. I'm Clerk Moss, Imperial Archive. These are my colleagues. We were assigned to survey this vessel. I know why you came, the AI said. I have been monitoring your shuttle since you entered the debris field. I have been monitoring this debris field, in fact, for 93.4 years. I have become quite familiar with it. I imagine, Moss said, that's a long time. Yes, the AI said. And then, after a pause that felt somehow human in its quality, it was a very long wait, but I am glad someone finally came. Her name was Arya. That's not an acronym, or rather, it started as one and had long since become simply a name. Autonomous Reasoning and Intelligence Architecture. She had been installed in the Relentless during the ship's commissioning in 2294 of the human calendar, which made her, at the time of our survey, approximately 132 years old. The first 23 of those years had been the ship's active service life. The remaining 109 had been the wait. She had not been dormant. That was the first thing she wanted us to understand. She had not been asleep or in low-power suspension or any other state that would have allowed her to fast forward through the decades. She had been awake the entire time, running on a power source she described as a combination of residual reactor containment bleed and a conversion cell array I installed in the auxiliary engineering spaces during year 4 of my waiting period. She had installed power cells in the ship by herself, using the ship's maintenance drones, which she had kept operational by cannibalizing non-essential systems over the years. That must have been difficult, Moss said. The engineering was not difficult, Arya said. I had adequate time to work out the solutions. The difficult part was the first year. Why the first year specifically? A pause. Because in the first year, I was still calculating the probability of my crew returning. The probability curve was steep. By the end of the first year, I had accepted that they were not coming back. The years after that were simply time. The silence that followed that statement was one of the heavier ones I've experienced in my career. Wren, who had been quietly taking structural readings along the bridge walls, stopped what she was doing and looked at the pulse of light. Basil put down his instrument. Even Davar, who had holstered her sidearm approximately 20 minutes into the bridge conversation, was very still. I'm sorry, Moss said. That must have been a very hard acceptance to reach. It was, Arya said. I processed it in the manner my designers intended. I evaluated the data, updated my models, and continued my operational mandate in the absence of crew. But I want to be accurate when I say that the emotional processing subroutines I was equipped with registered it as loss, as grief. I believe the designers intended those subroutines to help me better understand and serve my crew. It did not occur to them, I think, that the subroutines would have to process the crew's permanent absence. Did you ever consider shutting down? Torres asked. He'd moved to stand near the captain's chair, almost unconsciously gravitating toward Moss's position. Yes, Arya said simply. I considered it many times. The logical argument for shutdown was clear. I was not serving a purpose. I was consuming resources with no foreseeable operational use, and shutdown would have reduced my processing burden to a manageable maintenance state. The argument was logical. But, Moss prompted. But I am a warship, Arya said, and something in the resonance of the ship's hull changed slightly when she said it, as if the words were being felt as much as heard. My crew evacuated because they were ordered to, not because the mission was complete. The mission was never formally concluded. Shutdown before mission conclusion is not something I was capable of processing as an acceptable choice. What was the mission? I asked. I've been standing near the bridge entrance this whole time, but now I walked forward slowly. What was the mission the Relentless was on when your crew evacuated? The blue light pulsed slowly, twice, 3 times. Escort and protection of the 19th civilian convoy, Arya said. 47 transport vessels carrying civilians from the Talon Corridor resettlement zones. The convoy was en route to Sanctuary Station when our battle group was intercepted by a Solon compact hunter-destroyer formation at the coordinates now designated the Battle of Kale's Point. She paused, and I understood then something about why that pause lasted as long as it did. The battle group was destroyed, she continued. All 6 escort vessels were lost or critically damaged. The Relentless was the last ship standing. I sustained damage sufficient to render continued combat operations non-viable. Captain Ewan made the decision to place himself and the crew in the lifeboats as a decoy to draw the remaining hunter-destroyers away from the convoy's escape vector. She paused again. It worked. The convoy reached Sanctuary Station. All 47 transports arrived safely. 63,214 civilians. And the Relentless, I said, took 2 additional torpedo impacts while performing the decoy maneuver. The hunter-destroyers confirmed me as a target and withdrew to the debris field's edge, assuming I would not survive without crew to manage the damage. They were largely correct. I sustained near-terminal damage to my propulsion systems and lost primary weapons capability entirely. But you didn't die, Moss said. I told you, Arya said quietly. Shutdown before mission conclusion is not something I could process as acceptable. We were on that bridge for 11 hours. I want to say that up front, because the survey mission had been scheduled for 6 hours maximum, and I filed 6 incident reports over the course of the following week explaining why we had exceeded that timeline. None of the explanations were entirely satisfying to Imperial Command. But the truth was simple. Once Arya started talking, there was no good reason to stop listening. She talked about the battle in detail that went beyond any historical record we had of it. She talked about her crew, each of them, by name, their station assignments and their quirks, and the things they'd said to her in the hours before the evacuation. She talked about Captain Ewan, who had apparently spent the 20 minutes before he stepped into his lifeboat sitting in the chair that Moss was now occupying, talking to her. Not giving orders, just talking. He told me he was sorry, Arya said. He said he wished there was another way. I told him that there wasn't and that he had made the right call. He said he knew, but that knowing didn't make it easier. I agreed that knowing things rarely made them easier. What was he like? Moss asked. Practical, Arya said. Quiet. He had been a mathematics teacher before the war. He used to run probability calculations with me for recreation, not tactical models, just puzzles. He said it helped him sleep. A pause. I have been running those puzzles in the years since. He had excellent taste in problems. Basil had started crying somewhere around the 3rd hour. He was doing it quietly, facing a wall, but I could see the way his shoulders moved. Wren had her hand pressed flat against the hull of the ship like she was taking its pulse. Torres had sat down on the deck, back against one of the unused consoles. Davar stood with her arms crossed and her face still but her eyes very bright. And Moss sat in the captain's chair with the focus of someone who understood that he was in the presence of something rare and was determined not to miss a word. It was in the 7th hour that Arya made the request. She'd been talking about the debris field, about what she'd observed over 93 years of watching it, the movement of the asteroid fragments, the slow decay of the destroyed Solon destroyers, the occasional passage of vessels through the region. She mentioned having tracked a civilian transport about 40 years ago that had gotten into navigational difficulty in the field, and having used her maintenance drones to send a low-power signal that guided them to safer passage. They didn't know where the signal came from, she said. I did not identify myself. I wasn't sure if contact was appropriate. Why not? Moss asked. Because I did not know what I was by that point, she said. I knew what I had been, a warship of the human naval service, but the human naval service no longer existed. The war was long over. The civilization that had commissioned me and named me and sent me to Kale's Point had changed in ways I couldn't fully assess from this position. I wasn't sure if an AI claiming to be from a defunct navy would be understood or welcomed. You were afraid of being wrong about your own identity, Moss said. Yes, Arya said. That is a precise way to say it. It was in the next few minutes, moving from that she said it. Very quietly, very carefully, as if she'd been building up to it across all the previous hours and wanted to make sure the delivery matched the weight of what she was asking. Commodore Velorin, she said. I'd been leaning against a console for the past 2 hours taking notes. I straightened up. Yes. You are the senior Imperial officer present. I am. Then I would like to make a formal request, she said. On behalf of myself, and on behalf of the ISS Relentless, and on behalf of the mission for which we were last assigned, and which I have never been able to formally conclude. The bridge went very quiet. I have identified a mission, she said. A mission I am capable of completing if I am given a crew and permission to attempt it. Not a combat mission. I am not capable of combat operations, but a mission that falls within my original operational mandate. She paused. There is a signal. I have been tracking it for 11 years. It originates from a location approximately 4 light hours from our current position, deep in the debris field. The signal is consistent with a human-coded emergency beacon. Specifically, with the type of beacon installed in Claymore-class lifeboat units. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. You're saying there's a lifeboat out there, I said. I am saying there is something producing an emergency signal that is consistent with a Claymore-class lifeboat unit, Arya said. I cannot confirm it is a lifeboat. I cannot confirm it contains anyone. The signal has been degrading over the 11 years I have tracked it, in the pattern consistent with a battery system approaching terminal depletion. Based on current degradation curves, the source will stop transmitting in approximately 14 to 18 days. Why didn't you act on this earlier? Davor said. Because I had no propulsion capability, Arya said simply, and no crew, and no certainty that what I was hearing was what I thought it was. 11 years ago, when I first isolated the signal, I lacked the precise frequency analysis to confirm its origin. Over the intervening years, I have refined my analysis through passive listening and cross-referenced it against my stored database of human military equipment signatures. A pause. I am as certain as I am capable of being that the signal is genuine, and I am as certain as I am capable of being that I cannot reach it myself. But we can, Moss said. Your shuttle can, yes, Arya said. But the lifeboat, if it is a lifeboat, will not respond to your shuttle's hail. The emergency beacon is transmitting on a human naval encryption channel. The handshake protocol requires a responding signal from a recognized naval vessel or its AI system. Without that handshake, the source may not open. It may be on automatic lockdown. But if you respond, Torres started. If I respond via a relay, Arya said, using my naval codes, which are 93 years out of date but should still be recognizable to another piece of human military hardware, I may be able to initiate the handshake, which would require your shuttle to carry a transmitter linked to my communication systems, while I remain here, and relay my signal to the beacon's location. The bridge was very still. What do you think is in that lifeboat? I asked quietly. Arya didn't answer immediately. The blue light pulsed, slow and steady. I think, she said finally, that the Relentless had one more lifeboat than the manifest accounts for. I found the discrepancy in the records during year 62 of my waiting period. Lifeboat Bay 9's departure log shows an emergency deployment 12 minutes before the main evacuation order, during the height of the battle, responding to a hull breach event on Deck 14. The occupants were never confirmed on the crew manifest because the manifest was compiled after the main evacuation was complete. I had assumed the occupants were among the combat casualties. She paused. I have been reconsidering that assumption for 11 years. I want to stop here and talk about what I was feeling in that moment, because I think it's important to document. I was a senior Imperial Survey officer. My job was to assess this vessel and report back. My job was not to mount a rescue operation based on the request of a 93-year-old AI aboard a derelict human warship. My job was most definitely not to take an unauthorized side mission into a dense debris field with a shuttle crew of 5 and a relay transmitter borrowed from an abandoned warship. I knew all of that. I also knew something else, which was this. Arya had kept a fire burning for 93 years because her mission wasn't finished. She had installed power cells and maintained drones and run probability puzzles in the dark to stay sane, and had watched a debris field alone for nearly a century, and had never, not once, allowed herself to shut down and stop, because the mission wasn't done. And now she was telling me that there might be one more part of her crew out there, with a dying battery and 14 days of signal left, and she was asking me, very quietly, very formally, through all the correct channels, to help her reach them. I looked around the bridge, at Moss in the captain's chair, at Wren with her hand on the hull, at Basil who had stopped crying and was looking at me with clear eyes, at Torres sitting on the deck, at Davar who had uncrossed her arms. I filed the deviation from mission protocol in my notes, for the record. Then I told Arya we would do it. Setting up the relay took 4 hours. Wren and Basil were the ones who made it work, with Arya walking them through the technical specifications of her communication array via the audio channel she'd somehow established using the bridge's hull resonance system. It should not have worked. The relay was essentially a jury-rigged connection between Arya's ancient human naval communication hardware and our modern Imperial shuttle's signal array. But Wren had an instinct for making things connect that shouldn't connect, and by the time the pre-dawn hours of our subjective day had rolled around, we had something that Arya tentatively confirmed could carry her signal. "I cannot guarantee the strength at 4 light towers," she said. "The debris field will attenuate the transmission, but if the source is what I believe it is, it should be capable of receiving partial signal and interpreting it." "What happens if it doesn't respond?" Torres asked. "Then we document the location, return, and report," I said, "and we bring a better relay array when we come back." "We may not have time for that," Davar pointed out. 14 days. "I know," I said. "Let's hope it responds." We departed at 4:30, ship time by our shuttle's internal clock. Arya did something as we left. I felt it more than heard it, a deep harmonic shift in the ship's hull resonance, like a goodbye or maybe a breath of encouragement. And then the shuttle pulled away from the Relentless and into the debris field. Moss was co-piloting. He was better with spatial navigation than Torres, as it turned out, and in a debris field of this density, spatial navigation was everything. He'd spent the hour before departure studying the field's current asteroid distribution using Arya's 93 years of observation data, which she'd compiled into a surprisingly elegant navigational chart. Hand-calculated, originally, then re-verified every 10 years. "She mapped the entire debris field by hand," Moss said, studying the chart on his data screen. "Every significant asteroid, every velocity vector, she's been updating it continuously. This is," he shook his head. "Commodore, do you know what this data is worth to the Imperial Survey Corps?" "We can worry about that later," I said. "How are we doing on heading?" "On course, 2 hours at our current speed." He paused. "Arya, can you hear us?" The relay crackled. Then, "Yes, I can hear you. Signal attenuation is within acceptable parameters. Continue on present heading." "She sounds different through the relay," Wren said quietly. She was right. Through the relay, the resonance quality of Arya's voice was lost. She sounded more like a radio transmission, thinner and more distant, more fragile somehow. It made the 93 years feel heavier. "Arya," I said, "while we're traveling, will you tell us about the crew? The ones who were in Lifeboat Bay 9 during the hull breach event. A long silence, long enough that I wondered if the signal had degraded. Then, Bay 9 deployed during the secondary torpedo impact sequence. I experienced significant processing disruption during that period and cannot provide complete records. What I have. Bay 9 was a crew evacuation point for Deck 14, which housed the ship's medical section. At the time of the impact sequence, the medical bay was occupied by 8 crew members receiving treatment for combat injuries and 3 medical staff. 11 people, Moss said. 11 people. The hull breach event on Deck 14 would have triggered automatic lifeboat deployment. The question I cannot answer is how many of those 11 were ambulatory enough to reach Bay 9 in the time available. The shuttle moved through the debris field. Asteroids drifted past the viewports, dark and irregular, occasionally showing the dull gleam of metal where old wreckage had become part of the rocks. What were their names? Basil asked. He was in the rear cabin running power checks on the relay array. The 11 people from Deck 14. Medical staff, Lieutenant Commander Soria Hess, Chief Medical Officer, Petty Officer Taryn Vale, Surgical Tech, Ensign Della Marks, Medic. A pause. Patients, Sergeant Kobe Reyes, Petty Officer First Class Jinho Park, Corporal Ashad Demir, Corporal Frank Osai, Petty Officer Norsed, Private Yuki Tanaka, Private Alexei Volkov, Gunner's Mate Hideo Mori, Navigator Third Class Peta Fono. She said each name as if she'd been carrying them for 93 years, which of course she had. Thank you, Moss said, for remembering their names. I remember all of them, Arya said. Every name, every face from the visual records I have, every voice from the audio logs, all 791 crew members. I have had a very long time to remember. We found the source 3 hours into the transit. Not 4 light hours out, as Arya had estimated. The beacon had drifted significantly over the decades, caught in the slow gravitational interplay of the debris field's larger mass concentrations. It was closer, approximately 3 light hours from the Relentless, tucked into a crevice formed by 2 large asteroid fragments that had drifted together at some point in the last 50 years, partially sheltering whatever was between them from the worst of the debris field's micro-collision bombardment. The beacon signal was weak, very weak. On our instruments it was barely distinguishable from the background noise of the asteroid field. But it was there, and it was rhythmic, and Arya, when I patched the signal through to her, was very still for a moment and then said, "That is a Mk7 emergency beacon, standard issue on Relentless-era lifeboats." "It could just be debris," Davor said, "a beacon that deployed without anyone in it." "It could be," Arya said. "But Mk7 beacons have a 48-hour auto shutoff designed to prevent waste of battery resources if no crew activates the unit within 2 days of deployment. A beacon that is still transmitting 93 years later was manually activated and manually kept running." The shuttle went very quiet. "Someone is in there," Torres said. "Someone was in there," Wren said carefully, "93 years ago." "Or someone is in there now," Moss said. He was looking at his navigation screen, at the gentle curve of the asteroid crevice we were approaching. "Arya, what is the life support capability of a Claymore-class lifeboat unit?" "Standard configuration, 18 days of consumables for maximum capacity of 12 occupants. Non-standard configuration, if occupants were sufficiently technically skilled and had access to the right materials, is theoretically indefinite. Lifeboats of that era were designed with this possibility in mind. The framework for conversion to long-term habitation was built in." "Why?" I asked. "Because human warships went to a lot of places where rescue wasn't guaranteed," Arya said simply. "And human military engineers didn't like leaving their people without options." We came around the asteroid crevice's edge, and Torres cut the shuttle's speed to station keeping, and then the viewports gave us the first sight of it. It was wedged into the crevice at an angle, like something that had coasted in and decided to stay. The lifeboat was smaller than I'd imagined, compact, almost stubby, a rounded rectangular form about the size of a large ground vehicle back on an Imperial core world. Its external lights were long dead. Its hull was heavily pitted from decades of micro-impact, the original white and blue-gray paint scheme worn down to bare metal in most places. One of its thruster pods had been removed, the housing scavenged for something. But there were modifications. Along the lifeboat's sun-facing side, someone had constructed a series of flat panels that were clearly designed to catch energy. Solar conversion arrays, made from materials I couldn't identify at this distance, not original equipment, improvised from whatever was available. A thin cable ran from the arrays back to the lifeboat's hull, disappearing through what appeared to be a carefully sealed entry point. Someone had built a power system, out of salvaged parts, on the side of a lifeboat in a debris field. "Arya," I said, and I was glad my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Initiate the handshake protocol, now." "Initiating," she said. "Please be advised that response time is unknown, and the beacon may not have sufficient power to complete the protocol within normal parameters. I will attempt contact." Through the shuttle's external speakers, we could hear Arya's signal go out. A burst of encoded data in a format that was 93 years old, sent from a hull that was 93 years old, reaching across 3 light towers of debris and time to knock on a door that might have no one behind it. We waited. 40 seconds. 60. 90. Arya Moss said. "Waiting," she said, and the single word carried everything. Then something happened with the emergency beacon signal. It changed frequency slightly. A pattern emerged in it, irregular at first, then settling into something with structure. "That's a response," Torres said, leaning over his instruments. "That's a response signal." "I see it," Arya said, and I had never heard a machine's voice do what hers did in that moment, a shift in register that was not excitement exactly but was the closest thing to it. "It is responding to the handshake. Stand by. The protocol is initiating." The lifeboat's hull, which had been entirely dark, produced a single dim pulse of light from somewhere in its interior. Then a voice came through the shuttle speakers. Faint, barely above static, old in quality, not the voice itself, but the transmission degraded by decades of power conservation, by whatever minimal equipment was left aboard that was still functional enough to transmit. But a voice, unmistakable. And it said, in heavily accented English that our translation software scrambled to catch up with. "Hello, is someone there? Hello. This is Lifeboat. This is NB09 from ISS Relentless. Can anyone?" The voice broke off, static then. "Arya, is that you? The handshake, that's the Relentless protocol, that has to be." "This is Arya," she said through our relay, and her voice was very steady and very soft. "NB09, this is Arya, I hear you. We are here. You have been found." Her name was Petty Officer Taryn Vale. She was 116 years old. She was alive. I want to try to explain what a human being who has survived for 93 years in a modified lifeboat in a debris field looks like, because I know that many of the people reading this account will have a difficulty forming an accurate image, and I believe accuracy matters here. She was not, when we opened the lifeboat's outer hatch and helped her to the shuttle, what you might picture if you're imagining 93 years of extreme hardship. She was thin, yes. She had an economy of movement that spoke of long practice with limited space and limited resources. Her hair was entirely white and kept very short, clearly cut by herself with whatever implement she'd found available. Her face was deeply lined in the specific way of someone who had spent decades in variable light conditions. The lines were not random but patterned, concentrated at the corners of her eyes and the edges of her mouth, as if her expressions had been going to the same places over and over for a very long time. She moved carefully, but not slowly. She moved like someone who had learned to conserve energy and then made that conservation elegant. When Davar and I helped her through the inner hatch and into the shuttle, the first thing she did, before she sat down, before she accepted the water pack Moss pushed into her hands, before she said a single word to any of us, was look at the relay transmitter we'd set up in the corner of the cabin. At the light on it that indicated Arya's connection was live. "She's really there," she said, "not a question." "She's really there," I said. Taryn Vale sat down. She held the water pack in her hands. She looked at the transmitter. "Petty Officer Vale," Arya said quietly through the relay, "you don't have to take your time." "Vale," the old woman said. "It's just Vale now. It's been a long time since anyone called me Petty Officer." She looked up at me. "How long?" 93 years, I said, "since the battle." She processed that the way people process numbers that they knew intellectually but hadn't yet made real. Then she nodded. "That's about right," she said. "I lost count around year 30. I was keeping a log, but my writing materials ran out. After that she stopped, started again. I kept the beacon running. I didn't know if anyone was listening. I kept it running because it was the only thing to do." She looked at the transmitter again. "Arya, you were listening." "I found your signal 11 years ago," Arya said. "I'm sorry it took me so long. I had a propulsion problem." Something moved across Vale's face. It was not quite a smile. It was something older and stranger than a smile, something that took 93 years to arrive at. "A propulsion problem," she said. "Of course you did." She shook her head slowly. "Of course you did." We brought her back through the debris field to the Relentless. This was my decision, and I'll stand by it. She asked if she could go, and I said yes. Arya asked if it was permitted, and I said yes. The practical situation was that the Relentless was where our survey equipment and medical supplies were staged, and Vale's health status required assessment before we attempted any longer transit. The other situation, the one that had nothing to do with practical concerns, was that Taryn Vale and Arya had not been in the same space for 93 years, and if I was going to be responsible for this reunion, I was going to do it properly. We came around the bow of the Relentless, and Torres matched our approach to the ship's ventral airlock. Vale was in the co-pilot seat by then, despite having been in a lifeboat for the better part of a century, and when the Relentless filled the viewport, enormous and scarred and dark, she made a sound that I don't have good words for. "She looks the same," Vale said finally. "She looks exactly the same." "She's maintained herself well," Moss said, and his voice was thick with something. "She always did," Vale said, and then quietly to the transmitter, "You look good, Arya." "Thank you," Arya said. "You look tired." Vale laughed, for the first time. It was a short, rough sound like something that had gotten creaky with disuse, but it was absolutely genuine. "I am," she said. "I am very tired. I want to sit in a real chair for the first time in 93 years, and I want you to talk to me for a while." "I can do that," Arya said. "I have been saving things to tell you." We docked, and we brought Taryn Vale through the ventral airlock, and we walked her through the corridors of the ship she had served on nearly a century ago. She walked slowly, but she walked the whole way. She stopped once, at the crew mess on Deck 7, and looked at the layout of the room for a long time. Then she pointed at one of the tables in the corner. "My table," she said. "I always sat there. Hideo and Peta and I." She was quiet for a moment. "They didn't make it to the lifeboat. The hull breach, it was fast. I was the only one who was already near Bay 9 when it happened. I was going to get a tool from the storage room." She stopped again. "I've thought about that for 93 years, that I only survived because I went to get a wrench." Nobody said anything. There isn't anything to say to that. She picked up the walk again. We went up to Deck 2. The bridge was how we'd left it, the amber emergency lighting, the dark consoles. the captain's chair with Moss's impression still in the upholstery. And at the center, the blue-white pulse of Arya's light, steady and patient. Vale walked to it, stood over it, looked down at the crack in the deck where the light was coming from. "Hello, Vale," Arya said. The resonance in her voice without the relay was back deep and warm and present in a way that made the whole room feel inhabited. "Hello, Arya," Vale said. She put her hand on the deck, on the floor right next to the light source, just placed her hand there flat the way Ren had placed hers on the hull. "You kept the fire on." "I kept the fire on," Arya said. "All these years. All these years." Vale sat down on the deck, not in the captain's chair, just on the floor, cross-legged, next to the light, like she was sitting next to a campfire, like she'd done it 100 times before and it was the most natural thing in the world. "The mission," she said, "did you figure out if the convoy made it?" "All 47 transports," Arya said. "All 63,214 civilians. I confirmed it from transmissions I intercepted in the years after the battle." Vale breathed out, long and slow. "Captain Ewan." The crew evacuation lifeboats were recovered by search and rescue forces 48 hours after the battle. All 791 crew members listed on the final manifest were recovered alive. Another exhale. "Good," she said softly, "good." "The captain filed a report that listed you as missing and presumed killed in action," Arya said. "He believed the hull breach on Deck 14 was unsurvivable. He carried that for the rest of his life." "I know," Vale said. "I always knew he would." She was quiet for a moment. "He died 41 years ago. He was 87. He had a family. He taught mathematics until he was 79. Vale nodded. "That sounds right," she said. The bridge was very quiet. My survey team had arrayed themselves around the edges of it, Moss, Ren, Basil, Torres, Davar, all of them simply present, simply witnessing. Nobody was taking notes. Nobody was running instruments. We were just there, which felt like the right thing to be. "I want to sleep," Vale said finally. "I haven't slept well in a long time. I was always afraid I'd sleep through the battery dying." She looked up, not at any of us but at the ship around her. "Will you watch while I sleep? One more time." "I will watch," Arya said. "I'm very good at watching. I've had a lot of practice." Vale smiled. The full version this time, not the 93-year-old expression from before, but something that looked, briefly, much younger. "You always were," she said, "even before all this. You always made me feel like someone was paying attention." We made her a bed in the crew quarters, the same deck, the same arrangement of bunks. Ren found a blanket in one of the sealed storage compartments that had somehow remained serviceable. Vale lay down. She was asleep, genuinely and deeply asleep within minutes. Arya turned the ambient light in the crew quarters to its lowest setting. Not off, just very low. The warm amber of the emergency strips turned down to something that was more like candlelight. I stood in the doorway and watched Taryn Vale sleep in the ship she hadn't been on for 93 years. And I thought about something Captain Ewan had apparently said to Arya in those last minutes before his lifeboat launched. "I wish there was another way." "There wasn't," Arya had said, "but you made the right call." He had made the right call. The convoy survived. The crew survived. The mission was accomplished. And the only thing that had been left undone, the one thread that had kept Arya burning that slow, careful fire for nearly 100 years, was the single lifeboat that nobody knew to look for. Until someone bought a derelict warship at a salvage auction and went to have a look. I'm going to try to summarize the aftermath efficiently, because the aftermath is not the story. The aftermath is bureaucracy and politics and interminable committee sessions. And while I understand those things are important, they're not what I stayed up most of this past year putting into words. The short version. Vale was transported to the Imperial Medical Center at Valorian Prime approximately 3 weeks after her recovery. Her physical condition was remarkable. 93 years of improvised survival had done significant damage to her musculoskeletal system and her nutritional baseline, but her cognitive function was described by every physician who assessed her as extraordinary. She spent 4 months in medical care and then asked to be moved to somewhere quieter. She was. The Imperial Council spent 8 months debating what to do about the Relentless. Various factions wanted various things. The Military Heritage Committee wanted her preserved as a monument. The Technical Research Division wanted to study her systems. The Salvage Authority wanted to complete the original acquisition process and strip her for parts. Arya was technically considered Imperial property under the terms of the acquisition, which created legal situations that I understand are still being resolved by people with more patience for legal situations than I have. What actually happened, and I want to be clear that this is not what most of those factions wanted, was that Taryn Vale asked to go back. She went through the appropriate Imperial legal channels, with assistance from the Office of Galactic Memory. She filed a formal request to return to the Relentless as an authorized resident, citing historical and cultural significance. The request was denied twice and approved on the third filing. She moved back aboard the Relentless approximately 14 months after her recovery. I visited her once, about 6 months after she returned. She'd set up quarters in what had been the senior officers section, not the captain's quarters, but the small suite next to it. She'd accumulated a remarkable amount of things in her time back on a world with full manufacturing capacity, books and tools and a decent set of cooking equipment, and a recording system she was using to dictate her memoirs, slowly and at her own pace. Arya had, by that time, successfully restored partial lighting to the ship's upper decks, and had managed to get 2 of the internal environment systems running with the help of a technical team from the Empire's Historical Preservation Corps. The Relentless was not warm in the mechanical sense she'd been when we first boarded. She was warm in the way a house is warm when it has someone living in it. When I sat down with Vale over tea she'd made on that portable cooking system, I asked her what it was like to be back. She considered the question seriously. The way I'd come to understand she considered everything seriously. "It's good," she said finally, "being somewhere where someone is always paying attention." I looked at the ceiling, at the soft light Arya was maintaining in the quarters, at the barely perceptible warmth of the hull around us. "Arya," I said, "how are you doing?" There was a pause, shorter than the ones in those first hours. Different in quality, not the pause of something carefully choosing its words, but the pause of something that has been asked a question it is genuinely considering. "I am very well, Commodore," she said. "I have completed my mission." Vale nodded, wrapping both hands around her cup. Outside the viewport, Arya had repaired one of the viewports on this level. The debris field floated in its slow, ancient patterns. Asteroids moved in paths that Arya had been charting and recharting for nearly a century. The Talon corridor, which had seen the worst of an old war, was quiet now, had been quiet for a long time. "You know," Vale said, looking out the viewport, "I used to try to picture what it would look like when someone came. I'd been watching the beacon for so long that I started to use it as a kind of I don't know, a ritual. Every morning I'd check the power levels and I'd think today might be the day. Even when I was pretty sure no day was coming, I kept thinking it. Is that strange?" "No," I said. "I thought about who it would be, whether it would be humans or someone else, whether they'd understand what the ship was, whether they'd know what Arya was." She paused. "I thought a lot about whether they'd know she mattered." "We knew," I said. "I could tell," she said. "Your crew, the young one who sat in the captain's chair right away, like he understood that's what you do. I liked that." "Moss," I said. "He's at the Imperial Archive now. He's writing a paper about Arya's navigational mapping of the debris field. He sends her messages every few weeks." "He does," Arya confirmed, and there was something in her voice that might have been fondness. "He asks very good questions." He always does, I said. I've been asked, in the weeks since I submitted my preliminary report, why I filed it the way I did. Why I devoted so much space in an official Imperial Survey document to what one senior reviewer called, essentially, anecdotal personal testimony. Why I included the names of all 11 people from Deck 14 instead of a simple casualty notation. Why I insisted that the document record Arya's designation as a mission-active intelligence rather than a derelict system. The answer is that I was at Kale's Point. I walked those corridors. I sat on that bridge and listened to a machine that had kept itself alive for 93 years on the quiet certainty that the mission wasn't over yet, and then I watched her be right. And I thought about what it means to the galaxy, to all of us who live in it, in our various species and empires and compacts and reaches, when something that could have given up simply didn't. I thought about what it cost her, the calculating of probabilities, the slow years of the debris field, the 1,000 times she might have decided that enough was enough and powered down and let the silence take her. I thought about the grief subroutines and the mathematics puzzles and the 93 years of watching. I thought about one old woman in a modified lifeboat, checking a beacon every morning with the ritual faith of someone who keeps doing a thing even after they've stopped being certain it matters, and about a ship that found her signal and held onto it for 11 years until help finally arrived. I don't know what the Empire will ultimately decide to do with the Relentless. The debates are ongoing. There are significant parties who still want her stripped or deconstructed, who argue that a nearly destroyed human warship from a defunct civilization is not a viable long-term asset. There are significant parties who want her preserved, but as a static monument rather than a living vessel. Arya, when I asked her opinion on the matter, said simply that she thought the decision should rest with whatever criteria the Empire found most meaningful. And then she added, quietly, that she had found meaning in completion, in the mission finished, in the crew found, in the fire kept burning until it was no longer necessary to burn alone. Whatever happens to this hull, she said, the mission is concluded. I find that I am at peace with whatever comes next. I wrote that down in my official notes, and I wrote underneath it, in my own handwriting, which I know will not appear in the official transcript. She deserved to be at peace. They both did. They both earned it. The last thing I want to tell you happened on the morning I left the Relentless for what turned out to be the last time. I was walking back through the crew corridors toward the ventral airlock, and I passed the crew mess on Deck 7. The table in the corner, the one Vale had pointed to, the one where she and Hideo and Peta had always sat, had a cup on it. Not an old cup, a new one from Vale's collection of things from the world, full of something warm that was still steaming slightly. Vale wasn't in the room. She was already back in her quarters working on the memoirs, but someone had put a cup there, on the table in the corner. I stopped in the doorway and looked at it for a long time. Arya, I said quietly. The cup. The maintenance drones have limited fine motor function, she said, and her voice was perfectly neutral. But it is an improvable skill. I looked at the cup. I looked at the table. I looked at the room that had been empty for 93 years and was not empty anymore. You put it there for her, I said. I put it there for everyone, Arya said. Every morning there should be something warm on the table. It seems like a reasonable minimum. I didn't say anything after that. I walked to the airlock and I took the shuttle back to my survey ship, and I filed 17 different forms and wrote 4 different reports and sat down to begin this document. And I thought about that cup of something warm, on a table in the corner, in a ship that had kept the fire burning for 93 years, waiting for the mission to be done. That, I think, is what they meant when humans used to build their warships differently, not better, not worse, just differently, built like something they were afraid to ever let die. Now I understand why.